Imagine this, a family supposedly bound by love, betraying one of their own. A grandmother abandoned by her son and daughter-in-law left alone in the cold, her dignity shattered. The night was quiet, but the events unfolding were anything but. As the grandmother, Eleanor, sat on that porch shivering in silence, a story of betrayal, manipulation, and hidden strength began to take shape. What was supposed to be her final moments in their lives was just the beginning of a powerful revenge. What will happen when the silent one finally speaks up? The answer. It will shake the foundation of everything they thought they controlled. It was 4:15 in the morning when I saw it happen. The security feed pinged on my phone and I didn't think much of it at first. I'd just gotten back from work and the world outside was still wrapped in a cold early morning mist. But then the image on my screen shifted and I saw them, the people I called family. My father Daniel pulling my grandmother Eleanor from his luxury SUV like she was some unwanted piece of furniture. I felt the blood drain from my face as he didn't help her. Stan didn't even offer a hand. He just dropped her there on the freezing concrete right at the edge of the porch. In her slippers, no less. And then my mother Marie. She threw 2 black garbage bags onto the porch next to her. It wasn't just a careless move. It was deliberate. I watched in horror as one of the bags split open, spilling a knitted cardigan into a puddle. That's when I realized those bags weren't full of garbage. They were full of her clothes, my grandmother's clothes. They had left her there, abandoned, like trash. I stumbled to the door, gripping the frame, the rage bubbling up inside me so fiercely I almost couldn't breathe. I had only moments to act, but they hadn't knocked. They hadn't rung the doorbell. They hadn't even looked back. I could just see the taillights fading into the mist as they sped off. My hands were shaking as I threw open the door. There she was, Eleanor, my grandmother, sitting on the porch in the cold rain. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even look at me. She just stared at the ground, her face a mask of calmness that terrified me more than anything else. I helped her inside, not knowing what to say. I didn't even have words for the hurt and the anger I felt in that moment. All I could do was wrap her in the thickest blanket I had, the one I usually saved for sick days. The silence in the room was deafening as I sat beside her. The cold of the rain had seeped into her bones, but what really hurt was the emotional chill I could feel in my own chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run after my parents and demand they take her back, but I knew it would be pointless. They had made their decision. I went into the kitchen, put the kettle on, and tried to collect my thoughts. I had always been the one to take care of things. The one who fixed what was broken, paid the bills, cleaned up the messes. My entire life had been about smoothing over the cracks they made. It wasn't the first time. My parents, especially my father, had always demanded more, always needed help, but they never gave anything back. For years, I had been the silent investor in the Henderson family facade. My parents were drowning in debt, pretending to live some grand life that they couldn't afford, and I was the one holding them up, always footing the bill. The bills I paid on time, the ones they never saw or cared to. I thought back to 3 years ago, a Tuesday night. I had been sitting at my kitchen table staring down at a bowl of instant ramen. My checking account balance was down to $40. That's when I got the call from my father. His voice cracked as he told me how dire the situation was. He needed $2,800 and he needed it fast. If he didn't get it, he'd lose his office lease. He said he was doing it for the family legacy. He cried on the phone, and like a fool, I sent the money. I ate ramen for 3 weeks. And what did I get in return? The image of my brother Brandon posting stories on Instagram from a yacht in Miami, holding a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my rent. Self-made, the caption read. It wasn't even subtle. The audacity. Later, I found out that yacht trip had been funded by grandma's pension checks, the ones my mother claimed were needed for an emergency roof repair. There was no roof repair. My mother had lied. She had taken the money and Brandon had used it to impress people who didn't even care about him. That's when I realized the family economy was a scam. I was the safety net. But Brandon was the trapeze artist jumping from one expensive thing to another, never bothering to learn how to catch himself. And my parents? They were the ringmasters of this twisted circus, obsessed with the show. They lived in a mansion they couldn't afford to heat. They drove leased cars they couldn't afford to insure. And all the while, they were sinking deeper and deeper into debt. Meanwhile, I was left to pick up the pieces to keep things together. I was the one who paid for everything. Everything. The gas, the groceries, the mortgage, and sometimes the rent. I did it because I didn't know how to say no. I did it because I thought that was what family did. They support each other, right? But the truth was, they had been using me, manipulating me. It was always me pulling the strings to keep their world intact. And for what? So they could go on pretending, so they could throw a $100,000 vow renewal ceremony at the Seattle Yacht Club, not because they loved each other, but because they needed to impress a tech investor. I handed my grandmother the mug of tea and watched her sip it slowly, the steam rising around her face. I couldn't stop the questions from bubbling up inside me. Why had they done this? Why? Tonight? Why now? Then it clicked. Last week, I'd gone over for dinner rare, yes, but it happened. My mother had talked about renovations, about Brandon's new business podcast idea. He wanted a studio with soundproofing and high-end lighting. He wanted the downstairs suite, the very same suite my grandmother had lived in. That's when it hit me the cruelty wasn't an accident. They didn't dump her because she was difficult. They dumped her because she was taking up space. The space Brandon wanted for his microphone. I looked at Eleanor as she sat there calmly sipping her tea, and I saw the truth for what it was. They had thought she was disposable. They had thought I would just pick up the pieces like I always did, quietly without question. But I was done. I was done being their safety net. It was time to cut the ropes. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. I wasn't going to keep cleaning up their messes. And in that moment, I knew something inside me had snapped. The calmness I saw in my grandmother's eyes wasn't just the resignation of an old woman. It was the quiet power of someone who had been underestimated for far too long. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen expecting to find a broken old woman who needed guidance. I thought I'd have to explain things to her, maybe comfort her and help her understand why she had been discarded so callously. I expected her to be confused, maybe even frightened. But when I walked in, I found something entirely different. Eleanor wasn't hunched over in a blanket anymore. She was sitting at my kitchen table wearing my oversized robe, back straight, eyes sharp. She didn't look fragile. She didn't look lost. She looked in control. I froze in the doorway. She wasn't the grandmother I had been so used to, a woman who had begun to fade into the background of my life, who always seemed to lose her place in conversation. No, This was a woman who had been quietly watching and observing everything around her. It was like I was seeing her for the first time. "Did you cancel it?" she asked. The words were calm, collected, but they sent a chill down my spine. She wasn't asking me like a confused elderly woman would. She was asking like she already knew. I stared at her, my throat tightening. "How do you know about that?" I asked, barely able to form the words. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she simply gestured for me to sit down. Her eyes never left mine. Slowly, I walked to the chair and sat down across from her, my mind spinning. How could she know about the transfer I hadn't told anyone? I hadn't mentioned it to a soul. Eleanor smiled, only it wasn't the soft, comforting smile I was used to seeing. It was something else. Something cold. Something calculating. "Sit down," she repeated. "We have work to do." As I sat there trying to wrap my mind around what was happening, Eleanor began to speak, her voice steady. "Your mother told me I was confused, that I was forgetting things. But she was wrong. I let them think I was losing my mind, Susan. It was the oldest trick in the book. The possum strategy. You play dead to see who comes to eat the carcass." I felt a lump form in my throat as I listened to her. The woman who had been dismissed, neglected, forgotten by everyone had been playing a much larger game all along. She reached into the pocket of the trash bag my mother had thrown at her the night before and pulled out a battered, peeling red leather notebook. I didn't know what it was at first, but the moment she opened it, I could see it was filled with tightly written notes. Her handwriting was precise, almost obsessive, and the dates on the pages went back years. "The thing about being underestimated, Susan," she said softly, "tapping a page in the book is that people forget you're watching. They think you're not paying attention. They get careless." My hands were trembling as I looked down at the book. She slid across the table to me. It was a ledger, not a diary. A forensic accounting of everything my parents had done. Every betrayal, every lie, every penny they had taken from her. The first entry was from June 12th. Marie took $600 cash from my wallet. Eleanor's voice echoed in my mind as I read it aloud in my head. Told me she bought my heart medication. Pharmacy receipt shows she only paid a $40 copay. The rest went to skin treatments for Botox. The next entry was from August 4th. Daniel forged my signature on a dividend check for $4,500. Told me the company hadn't paid out this quarter. I called the broker. They paid. I flipped through more pages, each one revealing more of their cruelty. Brandon stole my pearl earrings. Marie told me I lost them because I was clumsy. Page after page, the evidence was laid out in front of me. The details were undeniable. I wasn't waiting to die. Susan Eleanor continued, her voice sharp. I was building a case. You don't spring the trap when the rats are just sniffing around. You wait until they are fat, comfortable, and think they own the house. Then you snap the neck. My heart was pounding in my chest. It was like a switch had flipped. The vulnerable grandmother I thought I knew had turned into something else entirely. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a strategist playing a long game, and I was her ally now. She looked at me, her gaze unwavering. They thought I was a burden. They thought they could throw me away like trash, but they were wrong. I've been preparing for this moment for a long time, and now we have work to do. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The woman I had thought needed saving had been quietly saving herself. She had been keeping score, taking notes, and waiting for the right moment to strike. And now that moment had arrived. "I'm done playing possum," she said, her voice hard and final. We're going to collect what's ours. For the first time in my life, I realized just how much power Eleanor had. Not in wealth, not in status, but in the knowledge she had kept hidden. In the quiet, unspoken strength that no one had ever noticed before. And now she was going to use it to tear down everything my family had built. The morning after Eleanor's revelation, something inside me shifted. The woman I had once thought weak, a fragile old woman who needed me to fix everything, had shown me a side of herself I never knew existed. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was the mastermind of her own survival. And now, she was guiding me into the heart of my family's deception, into the web of lies and manipulation they had spun around me for years. We began the unraveling slowly, carefully, almost like peeling an onion. Eleanor had been preparing for this for so long. She had known exactly where to look, where to search, where the cracks were hidden. I had no idea how deep the lies went, how much my father had hidden from me. But Eleanor had seen it all. We started with the bank account. The joint account my father had access to, the one that held what he thought were Grandma's savings. The account he assumed was the last vestige of Eleanor's financial worth. I opened the app on my phone, feeling the weight of the moment. My thumb hovered over the screen. Eleanor stood beside me, her presence solid, unwavering. I could feel the shift in power between us. The balance had tipped in her favor. She wasn't the one waiting for someone to save her anymore. She was in control now. I tapped the account, pulling up the details. The balance blinked back at me. $812. The account my father thought contained my grandmother's life savings had been drained. My breath caught in my throat. It was like a slap in the face. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend it. My father, the man who always prided himself on controlling everything, had bled the account dry. "He drained it yesterday," Eleanor said softly, standing behind me and watching the numbers on the screen. Her voice was calm, but the anger simmering beneath the surface was palpable. "He thinks he cleaned me out. He thinks that $40,000 was everything I had." The realization hit me hard. All these years I had thought my father was the one pulling the strings, the one making the decisions. But in reality, it had all been smoke and mirrors. He had no idea that Eleanor, the woman he discarded, was the true source of the family's wealth. And now, she was ready to show him just how wrong he was. I turned to face her, my heart pounding. "Kanu, what do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's eyes were steady, unflinching. "We fight back. We take back what's ours." She reached into her dress and pulled out a small, heavy brass key. It seemed almost ordinary, but I could see the significance in her eyes as she pressed it into my palm. The warmth from her skin lingered on the metal. "Go to the First National downtown," she instructed. "Safety deposit box 404. It's time you met the real landlord." The words sent a chill down my spine. The key was not just a symbol. It was a door to something much bigger, something I hadn't yet understood. But Eleanor had seen it all, and now she was ready to hand me the keys to the kingdom. I grabbed my coat and drove to the bank, my mind racing with the questions I didn't have answers to. What could possibly be in that safety deposit box? What was Eleanor hiding, and why had she kept it from me for so long? When I arrived, the bank vault smelled old, dusty, like time itself had settled in the corners. I slid the long metal box out of the vault and placed it on the counter. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was to come. I could feel the weight of everything that was at stake now. I unlocked the box and opened it. Slowly, carefully. The contents inside were not what I expected. It wasn't a collection of jewelry or old bonds as I had imagined. Instead, there was a stack of thick legal documents, each one bound in blue folders. I opened the first folder, the commercial deed for a 12-story office building in downtown Seattle. The exact building where my father's consulting firm rented the entire top floor. The owner listed wasn't a faceless corporation or some nameless entity. It was EH Properties LLC. The owner, Eleanor Henderson. My heart stopped as I flipped through the folders. There it was, the deed to the house my parents had claimed as their legacy estate. The mansion on Queen and Hill, the one they lived in, the one they flaunted in front of everyone as proof of their success. It wasn't their home at all. It was Eleanor's. The deed was signed in her name, not theirs. I sat down on the cold tile floor of the vault, surrounded by millions of dollars in real estate paper. My grandmother wasn't just a retiree with a small pension. She was a tycoon, a landowner with an empire that my parents had no idea about. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Eleanor was no longer the helpless, discarded woman. She was the real owner of everything my parents thought they controlled. I flipped to the next folder, correspondence from a property management firm. Notice of default, 3 months past due. Second notice, commercial lease violation. Final warning, eviction proceedings imminent. My father had been using the family business to fund his lavish lifestyle, gambling with the family's future to impress people who didn't care about him. He had no idea that the person he had discarded, the woman he thought was out of the picture, was the one holding all the cards. My hands trembled as I packed the papers back into the box. I had no idea what Eleanor was planning next, but I knew one thing for sure. My family's world was about to come crashing down. Eleanor wasn't just going to get back at them. She was going to take everything they had, and I was going to help her do it. The day of the vow renewal arrived, and with it, the culmination of everything Eleanor and I had planned. The Seattle Yacht Club was the perfect setting for my parents' grand spectacle. The polished wood floors gleamed beneath the soft light, and the crystal chandeliers glittered above the guests, creating an air of false elegance. My parents, Daniel and Marie, stood at the front, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. They were dressed to the nines, pretending to be the couple everyone admired, the epitome of success. They had no idea that everything they had worked for was about to come crashing down. I watched from the back, seated among the staff, blending in with the catering team. I wasn't there to eat cake. I wasn't there to smile and toast their love. No, I was there for something far more satisfying. The microphone was passed to Daniel, who stood in front of the room, holding a Scotch glass, laughing with a group of men in suits. He looked so confident, so in control, as if he owned the world. He had no idea who the real owner was. With a nod from Eleanor, I slipped into the control booth. My heart raced as I connected my laptop to the projector's main HDMI port. The system hummed the sound of servers in the background, mixing with the chatter of the guests. The first few images flashed on the screen: family vacations, luxury cars, big smiles, all of it bought with stolen money, the perfect facade they had built for themselves. Then the final file appeared, the video, the truth. I texted the contact saved as "Landlord, I'm in, you're up." The lights dimmed and the room fell silent as the screen flickered to life. The security footage from that morning, the moment my parents discarded Eleanor on the porch, played for all to see. I could hear Marie's voice clearly through the speakers, cold and detached. If she dies of pneumonia cheaper than heart meds. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one could look away. The doors burst open, and Eleanor walked in flanked by 2 King County sheriffs and her lawyer. She moved with purpose like a queen reclaiming her throne. The guests parted as she made her way down the aisle, Daniel frozen in shock as she took the microphone from his hand. "I am not in a home, Daniel. I am the sole owner of EH Properties LLC, your landlord." Her voice echoed through the ballroom, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Tonight isn't a celebration, it's an eviction. Eleanor handed him the eviction papers, her expression unwavering. Daniel's empire built on lies and stolen money was now crumbling before him. The guests who had once admired him watched in stunned silence as his world fell apart. The sheriff handed Brandon his notice, and Marie, the woman who had manipulated everyone around her, collapsed in dramatic fashion, but no one caught her. I walked down the aisle and stopped in front of my parents. "You paid for this?" Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. "You always wanted me to pay for everything," I replied, my voice steady. "I finally did." Eleanor took my arm, and we left together, the sound of the ruin we left behind fading as we walked out of the room. My parents had played their game, but they had underestimated the power of the one they had discarded. Now they would pay the price for their cruelty. Looking back on everything that's happened, I realized just how far I've come. Not just in what I've done, but in who I've become. For years, I was a silent enabler, the one who picked up the pieces after everyone else had torn things apart. I thought that was what family did, that you quietly carry the weight that you sacrifice for those you love. But the truth is, I was the one who was being used, manipulated by those who were supposed to love me most. Standing beside Eleanor now, I see things differently. The woman I once saw as fragile as someone in need of saving has become my ally, my mentor, my equal. She was the one who showed me that sometimes you don't need to wait for someone to rescue you. Sometimes you just need to take back control and use the power that's always been in your hands. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was ours. It was about showing that family doesn't mean allowing yourself to be trampled, that love doesn't mean being a doormat. It's about standing up for yourself no matter how hard it is. Family betrayal, trust, these are things we don't take lightly. But when we allow ourselves to be taken for granted, when we let others walk all over us, we only have ourselves to blame. The cost of kindness shouldn't be your own peace. And in the end, the truth always finds a way to the surface. It may take time, but when it does, it can change everything. If you've ever felt like the one carrying all the weight, or like your kindness was taken for granted, remember, you have the power to take control. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply reclaiming your life, your worth, and your dignity.